film 4 times now, and every time I see more and more in it, it is a phenomenal work. I think it's really, I think it's a contemporary masterpiece, and it's not to be underestimated.
Thank you.
So, going back to the Yellow House, I'm sure people are really eager to know what's going on there now. How are the kids doing? How are kids like Steele progressing?
Well, the good news is that Steele is Anam, the lovely policeman's son who's going to university. He's giving Steele lessons to hopefully get him into school. The weird thing is that his brother, Bulldog, who's only a little bit older, recently got married. We're invited to the wedding. And our wonderful goat, Abdul, and his girlfriend, Juliet, have had twins. And the great thing for us, the reason why we can be here, it's a huge responsibility on Helen and I to keep the Yellow House going, and we're, like parents, we're worried about all the kids and everyone else, is that we've trained the people at the Yellow House so well. Nihar's a fantastic editor, and Amar Shah's a great actor and performer, cameraman, that Benjamin Gilmore, who made Australian film Son of a Lion in Pakistan, was able to go to the Yellow House while we've been away and employ everyone making a new Australian feature film, which will be a drama, which will be, and that was great because he doubted the skills of our people, and he's come back saying that they're exemplary. And even Brad Pitt is using their skills. He's shooting a film in Morocco and getting our guys to get real local colour and sound and so on to add to that film. And we've got a list of others. So I think quite often with projects like this, someone can get a grant and go in there for 2 weeks or a month and teach people how to use amateur cameras and document it well and come back and nothing happens. But we're aware that all of our people eventually, well, they have to feed their families, and eventually people like Amar Shah want to have wife and children, a car and a house. And so we're trying to, and successfully, get them work. And the women from Helen's workshops are now doing radio shows, they're on television. Zabi's shooting footage for local TV, and it's a really good news story.
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
If you could maybe talk a little bit more about the ethics of encounter there, which you've kind of entered into, because I think a lot of people probably hear about your work and they're not sure, if you're going in and exploiting people or it's just glorifying war. And I think anybody who actually spends time with your work know that that's not true. No. But you obviously have very strict guidelines and very good intentions. Could you? Well,
we could help write a guidebook on how to do something like that.
Doing that
I've just done. In fact, next week I'm going to Brazil, and there's a group working in the favelas called IPOW from Manchester.
It's basically called treating people like other people.
And
it's you go there and they're just like us. The people are. There's it's like hi. There's as I said, I'm an ex-teacher, so when I look at my room full of students, they're just like the students here in Australia. We're all people.
But
we're all people.
In terms of what happened was, the history of it was, I'd worked in Afghanistan for over 20 years. I was there during the Taliban prior to 9/11, and I created a mine awareness program with the UN and collaborated with the Taliban to teach children how not to pick up mines and how to regard minefields. And then when the whole crazy war that's undermined the stability of the world in Iraq happened, I felt that I had to work in Iraq, so I made Soundtrack to War. And then all the people of tribal belt of Pakistan and Afghanistan said, you've got to come back. So they invited me back, and I made Miscreants of Tollywood about how at that stage the Pakistani Taliban were destroying the film industry. When I showed that film in Amsterdam, Oxfam, which are a very good NGO, contacted me and they said, we're concerned about all these artists and filmmakers losing their jobs. So they sent me back to the tribal belt of Pakistan to make a series of films that re-employed all the, the people. Some of the actors and filmmakers in our movie have like 10 or 12 children, and they're all out of work. And while we were doing that, the filmmakers in Jalalabad came down and said, we need you even more, George. So I went directly from... so it's a matter of, I think it's very important to be invited into these situations. And then, for example, the films that we make could never be made if we're imposing our own scripts. So there's a very strict process. We even have people from Al-Qaeda vetting the scripts. And our main objective with the scripts is to project values for women, so that most of our stars are women. And one of the first films we made in Afghanistan is called Talk Show, and it's about a woman who comes from Pakistan, who's been educated, who's originally from Jalalabad, and she creates a talk show. Back then that was impossible. And she then starts fighting corruption through the talk show. Well, if you understand the politics there, everyone hates corruption. The Taliban hate corruption. And everything about that film in the West would seem like you couldn't do it, because we've got the wrong perception that the whole society is anti-women, which it isn't. And however, had we had men and women holding hands and kissing or doing anything like that, then we would have been closed down overnight and the actresses would have been killed. So a few anthropologists around the world have looked at our films, and they think that Helen and I really are like, field anthropologists, in that we've had to be very sensitive to and understand the whole, all the rules and regulations. And as a result, as you see in the film, Haqqani, who's one of the most feared leaders of the Taliban, came around, and that day was really scary. And we didn't know whether we were going to end the day without heads. And he said, we've done an investigation of you, and told us everything they'd observed. And at the end of it, he said, we think you're good. We think that we'll give you an umbrella of protection. And now he's got his children come to the Yellow House, and a few of them under our influence have said, we'd never accept our father's ideas anymore. And Haqqani himself said, I think you're changing me. And he said, when we accept democracy, I'm going to demand it that women have equal representation in government to men. So this is the power of actually being sensitive to the community and what they need. And Helen does know she has to wear a burqa outside, but she and all the other women in the workshop are saying that maybe in 10 or 15 years they won't have to. The problem is the Americans think that they can put a gun at people's heads and make men behave differently towards women in Afghanistan. That's not the way it works.
Great. And yeah, and are there some women's issues that I think are important to touch on? Because, of course, a lot of the film is really focused on these young men and boys, and in fact, you could say a lot of the painting and the other work that you do as well, but that is a really big part of what you're doing down there. And actually, just your film production house in general, because it's not just the films we see. How many films have you made for a local audience?
We've lost track. The funny thing is I'm probably the biggest producer of Pashtun language films in South Asia. And so when I go to Dubai, I'm often in the films. People from Pakistan and even in England, Pashtuns come up and they ask me to sign their DVDs, because these things go all over the world. And they don't realise that I'm Australian. But what was the question?
Oh, well, that was
women's issues.
Women's issues.
Yeah.
Well, Helen's best to answer.
Yeah, I just think we declared education on Afghanistan, and I think that, and music, and the Afghan people really cherish education, and the women's workshops are really exciting because there is a virtual apartheid against women in Afghanistan. I think they were going forward, but I think 30 years of war has just kiboshed that. And I think it's step by little step. And of course, as I was saying, there is an intelligentsia in Afghanistan. There is, beyond that, there's also just common people who just want to live and don't want to be embroiled in the chaos of what's going on around them with politics and one country tearing them apart and another one that isn't even on their turf. So with the women's workshops, it's really exciting. I thought that I didn't know how many I was going to get, and suddenly I had many. So we now have a solid group of 25 women, and they're making films. But when they first came in, they were scared. Not really of us, but they were scared that they were going to be exploited or exposed to something that tradition wouldn't allow. So we make very, very sure that we don't do that. And and many of the women wanted to perform in front of the cameras as well as using the cameras. And George thought up an absolute genius idea, because I realized the word niqab actually means mask. And being an actor myself, I thought, I'll go and get some beautiful masks and we'll have masks. And George said, great, I'll go and get some of those horror masks that the children were wearing, you know. So we were in Norway because the first film, Love City, was funded half by Norwegian funding. And we had so much fun. We went into one of those trick shops, you know. And George went and got all these beautiful horror masks, and I got all the butterfly ones. And we brought them back to the Yellow House, and I laid them all out. And I said, okay, girls, I've got you some masks. We're going to do a mask workshop. And I thought they'd go for the beautiful butterflies and the cat's eyes, and they went straight to the horror masks. They put on the horror masks, they were shrieking around the backyard, just having a great time. So in many ways, it's about bringing joy and happiness to a place where it has been robbed by everyone. Just everyone is stealing it. The US, the Russians, the Australians, unfortunately, the UK, and even, you know, even their own people. Well, it's not. I think it's Pakistani ISI, but that's another story. So that hopefully answers
But what
some of your...
also part of that question is, we can't show any of the women in Helen's workshops, or they could be in serious trouble, even killed. And so we've got to be careful. We've documented the workshops, but with those we have to take out all the faces with digitally to show them.
Can I just say something? It's about shame. It's all about one very small word, shame. So when the recent girl from Pakistan was killed by her own brother, it's because the indoctrination of shame is so strong in the extreme Islam and Wahhabist Islamic ideals that child, that young boy, was in such a dilemma. He didn't know, you know, it's almost as though he isn't responsible. It's a society that is responsible. And, you know, our own Catholic religion used to say, give me a boy by the age of 7 and I will give you the man. And extreme Islam says, give you the boy or the child by the age of 5 and I will give you the man. So it's about breaking free from fears and shame and all of those natural human things that are built up too big in the back of young people's minds, and giving them just an ounce of freedom and an ounce to just be who they are without looking at them in a judging manner, or without looking at their bodies for women. You know, just, you know, yes, we've got curves, deal with it, you know. Yes, we are sexy, and yes, you all love us, but just deal with it.
There's a beautiful story in Neha, who you see in the film. None of the women believe, when we tell them what it's like in Australia, that it's really like it is. They think it's all American propaganda. And so Neha, all her life, has dreamed of being able to ride a bicycle, a push bike, and she learnt to sort of ride one up and down in the backyard of the Yellow House. That's as far as she could go. And she came out to Australia to learn editing. We sponsored her. And the first thing I did was to take her to Cronulla Beach, and with 2 bicycles. And she couldn't believe it. It was like she was levitating, she was flying. And seeing women jogging with music in their ears. And so she took that story back and she said, it's all true, it's all true. And took hundreds and hundreds of photographs as evidence.
I had this funny moment. George was looking out the window. Neha had been back for 2 days now in Australia, or arrived in Australia for 2 days. And George looked out the window and he said, Helen, Neha's standing in the middle of the street smoking a cigarette. What's going on? And I said, darling, she's doing it because I said you can do that in Australia.
She's a real rebel. And another interesting thing that's happened is that most of the people at the Yellow House are extremely strong people, like Neha. And currently, the Yellow House, when we're not there, is run by Neha and Amo Shah. And they don't have a relationship. And it's been a huge thing to get the community to accept that a man and woman can be in the same building, in the same job, and they've gotten away with it. They're strong enough and people have accepted. And that's a huge step forward as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, I'm aware that we haven't got long today, so I've got plenty of questions, but I know there's some out in the audience. So who's got a question, put your hand up. If you can yell it out, and I might repeat it.
There's
for
one
the
up
mic
the back
as
there.
well. Yeah, up at the back.
The problem is that we've all been propagandised by the Americans, just as we're happy to believe there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Australia and America had no reason for going to Afghanistan. Bin Laden was already out of the country, and they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Mullah Omar had already given Bin Laden his marching orders, and they had no support for that at all. The Afghan Taliban have no interest in the wider world. They're just trying to end corruption in Afghanistan itself. And there are extreme elements amongst them, but the leadership of the Taliban are very well educated, and like Haqqani, they've got a lot of tolerance. And with the Sufi, I don't think a lot of the Taliban would be too worried about him, but ISR. And the sad thing is that when I came back to Australia to get the Peace Prize and returned to Afghanistan, in the window when I'd been away and taken away the protective bubble, he decided that he was safe enough to go into one of the regions beyond and play his instrument, and IS came in and smashed his harmonium, cut out his tongue and decapitated him. And that's one of the huge, tears come to my eyes thinking about it. I loved him. And the Kutchi basically are the indigenous people. They're like the Aboriginal people of Afghanistan. They predate the Persian-influenced people that are there. And the old Sufi was less a Sufi than a shaman, and he was teaching the equivalent of what Aboriginal tribal elders teach in ceremony here. And the Kutchi kids, the Ghostbusters you see in our film, were desperate to learn that. So we created a school, like for traditional cultures, at the backlot of the Yellow House. And the one, thing that can make me feel semi-okay about him is that I feel terrible that I wasn't able to, prevent him from going out and getting killed. But it is wonderful that the last, year of his life, he was doing what he believed in, which was teaching traditional culture. The Taliban are interesting. A lot of the leadership don't mind music and arts and things. What they don't want is what you call soft power, which is American and Indian influence, where they're bringing in, sex scenes and things like that, which their culture's not ready for. And that's why I'm saying we've had no problem from the Taliban or anyone else, even our local radical mullahs, to our films because they're culturally sensitive. But America's just put out a lot of propaganda. Even 20 years ago, when I was going to Afghanistan and working with well, not quite 20 years, but in pre-9/11, Mullah Omar, who was the leader of the Taliban then, gave me a personal letter, offering his protection and I was taking photographs and creating pictures and things to demonstrate the dangers of landmines. That was okay, but if I'd been showing Playboy pictures, I would have been in a lot of trouble. So that's, this is the thing that we're talking about, of cultural sensitivity. Australians are victims of incredible propaganda. That's what General Lay is saying, and that we've been relying too much on American intelligence and believing what the Americans tell us and sending our soldiers off. And what I've noticed here is that the first story that comes out, like the story of Bin Laden taking a gun and fighting off the brave, Navy SEALs that came in to capture him in Abbottabad. I knew he was in Abbottabad from 2006 when the Pakistanis first put him there. His people used to come up and visit us and watch us making films. If I knew, the CIA knew. But people all saw, this great President Obama and Hillary Clinton watching nervously on television. In reality, the evidence has come out that they were in complete collaboration with the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis closed down the airspace, they turned off the power in Abbottabad, they withdrew their guards from Bin Laden, and Bin Laden was in a room with bars on it. What we're told is one thing, and then later when the truth comes out, and this is not Michael Moore version of the truth, it's actual documented truth, it's too late. We've already absorbed the first story, and most people choose just to believe the first story, which is pure fabrication. And that's particularly the case with the way that... So what the desperate situation that's happened in Afghanistan now is that the Americans and the Australians went out like big game hunters to kill all the Taliban leadership, Afghan Taliban leadership. Now these were wise people like Haqqani. I enjoy Haqqani's conversation. He's not like I couldn't enjoy the company of a Christian fundamentalist in the deep south of America, I tell you. But I can enjoy the company of Haqqani. The Americans had loved to kill him. So they went out and bagged all these people, and these were the people that were keeping the Afghan Taliban moderate. The suicide bombings and everything, as we show in our film, and as Haqqani says, are Pakistani Taliban. They're totally different. And as it says in the film, you probably missed this, but Pakistani ISI are training them, and they've got their own agenda. Afghan Taliban are not training suicide bombers and using them. So it's the misinformation we're getting is incredible. And the other thing that I object to is that on Australian news, every time there's an attack in like the recent ones in France and Germany, people say that it's Muslims doing it. It's not Muslims, it's Wahhabis. The Wahhabis from Saudi Arabia, Wahhabism is an evil religion, very, very different to Islam, and everyone in Afghanistan and Jalalabad would agree. And back in 1993, I saw when Australia and everyone else was sending food into the famine in Somalia, the Saudis were sending Wahhabist preachers preaching Wahhabism there, and that's why that country's become dysfunctional. We spent millions of dollars to try and make it functional. Their Wahhabism brought it down.
Well, they sent Wahhabists, they set up, you know, Afghans were really excited that they were going to get schools, but they were just Wahhabist centres where the children were stolen virtually from their homes, like you see with the suicide bombers.
And the hatred of the arts comes from Wahhabism.
Madness.
And I think it's because of George Bush and oil or whatever, it's never brought up that all of this is coming. So in the history of it is that the Wahhab in the 1700s did a deal with the House of Saud to put them in power. They were king builders, and they still need them to stay in power, these wealthy, decadent Saudi rulers. And the deal is that they have to give not billions but trillions of dollars to the Wahhabists to be missionaries all over the world. And they're sending missions into Indonesia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and we've had to counter that. So when we take our circus out into the countryside, the villagers who have nothing have actually, of course, they're going to agree to take money to go and learn Wahhabism, this extreme form of radical thought. I won't even call it Islam. And they cry when we do our shows because our shows have traditional Afghan fairy tales, and the old men come up and say, we were told these stories and the Wahhabists have told us that it's wrong, we should only tell the children stories from the Quran and from their texts. And we're actually causing a rebellion, a cultural rebellion against that.
Well, I think we've only just scratched the surface. I can see there's one more question there, if we can answer it really quickly, because we still have the book signing to go. So, yeah, just in the...
Sean, what we're primarily doing, Sean, is we're not making documentaries like this. We're making dozens and dozens of Pashtun language films. 96% of people in Afghanistan are illiterate. They certainly can't read English subtitles, and they can't understand English. They couldn't even understand the subtitles if they were written in Arabic and Pashtun language. So we're making films in Pashtun, which are as powerful as this and similar. And you saw on the screen in the street in Jalalabad, we now rent an electronic billboard in the city and show trailers and music videos, and that's a huge step forward. When we first came to Jalalabad, it wasn't permitted to have any kind of billboard. And under our influence now, you've got billboards telling women they don't have to be forced into marriages they don't want, where there's refuge centres, and we have billboards, as you see in the movie, you know, printed ones, advertising what we do. But we also have that electronic billboard so that we're not hiding what we do, the whole city sees it. And the first time we did that, you saw at the end of our movie, we're showing it on the electronic billboard, we had a lot of, not Taliban, because we'd have gotten approval from the Taliban, but fundamentalist people in the street come up And they were shocked. They'd never seen anything like that before. And I said, but why are you shocked? You know all these children, they're all around us, they're all Afghan. It's Afghan stories, and the musicians have probably played music at your daughter's or son's wedding. And they got it. And now anyone in that city would defend our right to have those films there. And we have regular film screenings at the Yellow House, plus we're putting out and of course to all the people involved, our films are mainly edited. You know, this documentary's largely been edited by Nihar and Amir Shah and Waqar in Afghanistan. So there's absolute transparency with what we do, plus the fact that everyone loves the fact that what we do is funded by what we make. And so the sale of my art, although I don't sell too much of it, is enough to run the Yellow House. We're paying the rent and everything else. But that principle is great, because once we'd supplied them with cameras and editing machines and the training, and we've also supplied DVD burners so that the kids can burn the DVDs of the movies they make and put the stickers on them, they can now make enough money from the sales of the movies to make the next one. So we've made them self-sufficient. So as we're speaking now, they're probably making 3 new movies.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. It pains me terribly to cut it there. We could talk all day, and next time you're both in town, I hope we can. Yeah. But please give George and Helen another round of applause.
Can I ask one thing? Just one little thing. Everyone can do something to help the Yellow House by doing something very, very simple. If you are on Facebook, all you need to do is like the Yellow House Jalalabad, and you will get to be able to interact with Amir Shah, Nihar, Mashuk Shadab, Juan Doon, Arshad, our beautiful little 3 foot tall petite person. Everyone to do with the Yellow House. So you can speak to them, you can see what they're up to, and they really love to receive friendships from anywhere else in the world, because it gives them hope.
Absolutely, and we've got a better internet connection in Jalalabad than we do in Sydney. So
I don't know
it's amazing what social media is doing to transform that society. Yeah. So they're all on Facebook, and they've got the computers, and it's great. If this goes on the net, they'll be watching it tomorrow. Yes. So recently, when we won the big prize in Bologna, Helen sang as she did today. And everyone at the Yellow House sat around and watched her on the internet singing in a huge opera theatre, and they loved it because she had her local clothes on and she was singing in Pashto language. That was a huge thing.
The girls were Skyping me and just crying and going, "You did it, Helen! You did it!
Yeah, we did it.
You did it!" Of course I did it.
We're doing this for everyone there.
In that case, I think we should do one last thing before we thank the Yellow House. And everybody, 1, 2, 3, hello, Yellow House.
Hello, Yellow House.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to be signing any books.
Come and get a book.
And please go and see the exhibition at Mitchell Galleries.